Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Every life lost, obviously, is a tragedy. But sometimes, tragedies can serve as a wake-up call, even if it's just because of simple timing.
6 Indigenous people have been killed across Canada in police-involved incidents since August 29th. That was the day 31-year-old Jack Charles Peach from Clearwater Dene Nation in Saskatchewan was hit by an RCMP vehicle while walking on the 909 Grid Road off Highway 155 near Buffalo Narrows. Just one day later, 15-year-old Haas Lightning from Samson Cree Nation in Alberta was shot by RCMP during a confrontation.
I don't need to play that all for you. We'll discuss all of these stories today, but you get the idea. 6 totally separate incidents, nothing to do with one another on the surface. But just ask anyone who knows how encounters with police so often end for Indigenous people. They'll tell you exactly what connects these stories. It's an approach that clearly hasn't worked and isn't working. And so after 6 deaths in less than 2 weeks, MPs in Ottawa held an emergency meeting on the issue on Monday night. Will it change anything? Is it a first step towards a new approach? Is it too much to hope for even that? What would a truly new approach to police response look like anyway? How could we actually avoid these endings? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Joanna Roberts is a reporter with CityNews in Winnipeg. She is also a filmmaker. Hello, Joanna.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I wish we were talking under better circumstances, but you reported on these 6 deaths last week. I believe it was Friday. On Monday night, the first day that the House of Commons was sitting, MPs had an emergency meeting about just what's happened. What do you think about that response, and what might come out of it that people in the community you've spoken to might hope for?
You know, I think it's definitely an appropriate response, and it's certainly, just from what I'm hearing through both community leaders, community members, and allies, it's something that they have been hoping for such a long time. I definitely think it is good to use the word emergency, given that 6 Indigenous people have died since August 29th. So what I'm really hoping for is, all of these leaders across Canada coming together to really find the root source of why this is happening and hopefully take steps to be able to remedy that. So, next summer, next month, next week even, we're not seeing another person dying.
As we begin, maybe we can just start with the people themselves at the heart of this before we move on to the politics of it all and the police forces. Maybe you can just quickly walk us through the 6 people who are dead and how that happened to each of them.
Yes, absolutely. So since August 29th, it seems that, headlines have been happening so often in terms of an Indigenous person dying after contact with police or RCMP. So on the 29th, 31-year-old Jack Charles Peach, he's from Clearwater River Dene Nation in Saskatchewan. He was hit by an RCMP vehicle while he was walking on the 909 Grid Road off Highway 155 near Buffalo Narrows. The next day, 15-year-old Haas Lightning from Samson Cree First Nation in Alberta, he was shot by RCMP during a confrontation after police confiscated several weapons from him. A few days later, September 3rd, here in Winnipeg, 39-year-old Tammy Bateman was hit by a police cruiser that was driving through Fort Rouge Park. Now, Fort Rouge Park, for people who don't know, who don't live here, it's a well-known park for many encampments. So there are lots of people there all the time. And I know this is just the prairies, but it actually has extended throughout Canada. September 6th, Jason West, he's a 57-year-old Indigenous man. He was shot during a confrontation with Windsor Police in Ontario. Danny Nye from Atakaku Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, he's 31 years old. He was shot by Shellbrook RCMP during a police response to an assault at the Cree Nation, and it also resulted in non-life-threatening injuries to an officer. That was on September 8th. And the same day, Steven Deedom from Elsipogtog First Nation in New Brunswick, he was shot by RCMP. Officers said that he was in mental distress, he had a weapon, and he wouldn't cooperate with police.
I know that, and I think everybody listening knows because, it's received news coverage before. We've covered it before, that Indigenous people are more likely, let's just say, to have bad outcomes when encountering the police. Has there ever been anything like this in terms of such a shocking way to make that point, I guess? Like, I've been doing this podcast for 6 years now, and this kind of stunned me.
I've only been doing news for, I think, 3 years, and I've never heard of this happening before. I mean, obviously, it's not a surprise to hear that Indigenous people have had fatal run-ins with police. It's something that, advocates have been speaking about for a very long time, for decades. But just, 6 in 2 weeks, that's such a staggering number. And it's not even just located in one jurisdiction, it's all across Canada. And for me, that's really, really heartbreaking.
And what have the various police forces involved said about these incidents, which again, are not connected and vary so much, but yet all have the same outcome?
I think it's difficult to really understand what police, RCMP are going through at the moment and their side of things, because they're very tight-lipped, and rightfully so. All of these incidents have now been passed through to independent investigation units. So here in Manitoba, it's the Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba. It's a police watchdog. So incidents like this, when people are saying that, maybe police were too heavy-handed, police can't really say anything until that investigation is complete. And that can take months, up to a year in some cases, I feel. And so, we get one side with the family who rightfully are very angry. And then we get police and RCMP who really can't say anything. So it's a difficult situation all around.
How much do these incidents vary from person to person? Like, is there a pattern that you see in them that people you've talked to have seen in them, or are they all different?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Are these all one-off incidents, or is this a pattern where we really have to look at the root behavior of police and RCMP when Indigenous people are present? Some people might say, different jurisdictions, different officers, different rules. But at the same time, it is really hard to ignore that it's 6 people in such a short span. And I don't know. I don't know the answer. We have people that were shot. We have people that were hit by police cruisers. But, I'm in the community all the time. I talk to leaders, community members, allies. And what they are saying is that they see a pattern, and it's clear that something needs to change, and it has to be addressed with each jurisdiction across Canada.
What do they say about the root causes of this in their opinion, and how? Because again, these aren't specifically connected incidents, but they all happen kind of the same way. And how do the leaders feel about what's actually driving these incidents?
From what I'm hearing from many, many people, it's about the broken kinship between Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people and different police forces across Canada. I think that many people feel that it's clear, there are large groups of people that don't feel comfortable or even safe calling police and RCMP. But I mean, who else do you call in that case when you're in mental distress, when your loved one is in mental distress? Who are you supposed to call if not law enforcement?
We don't sadly have enough time to go through in detail every one of these deaths. And, as you mentioned, police are being tight-lipped about what actually happened in many of them. But I know you spoke with the uncle of one of the deceased, Steven Deedom, and maybe we can just use this as a way to kind of illustrate how these events kind of unfold. Can you tell me what you learned about what was actually happening that night?
Yes. So it's such an unfortunate and tragic situation. So I spoke to Dominique Deedom. He is Steven Deedom's uncle, and he calls him Iggy. And he says that, during the day, the night before, they were out celebrating. It was Dominique's 64th birthday. And so leaving Steven in such high spirits and then suddenly hearing, they both live on the same property. So Steven was at the home. Dominique was in a shed in his workshop, just not even 50 feet away, hearing the gunshots, hearing one of his other family members saying, the police shot Iggy. And Dominique wondering why. Why did the police suddenly come? I just saw him 20 minutes ago. And apparently, Dominique has said that, Steven was clearly in a state of mental distress, but what he needed was not an angry confrontation by RCMP. He needed somebody to be able to humanize him and talk him down. There's an organization in Saskatchewan called Indigiwatch, and it is a group meant to accompany police during mental distress calls in an effort to de-escalate rather than confront. And he says that Indigiwatch was not there. There have been reports from different news outlets saying that they weren't even called or weren't even aware that RCMP had been dispatched to the Deedom house. So he's wondering why. Where did Iggy fall through the cracks? And furthermore, why did they shoot to seemingly kill is his question.
Can you explain maybe a little bit more about groups like Indigiwatch, and I know you've reported on some others, and how they operate and what they're there to do?
So I think that police have a very clear job, which is to keep everybody safe. But there are also different ways to be able to do that. So groups like, in Saskatchewan's case, Indigiwatch, groups here in Manitoba, Indigenous-led groups like Mama Bear Clan, Morgan's Warriors, Sabe Peace Walkers, they're all grassroots organizations who are out in the community. So people know their faces. Lots of people, and news outlets included, we know everybody in those groups because they are so active in the community. And when you are so active in the community and you attend one of these distress calls, it's a familiar face. And what their goal is to de-escalate situations. So in the Deedom case, if Steven was holding a weapon, which he was, rather than having RCMP come in and, threaten and shoot, what Indigiwatch, what these groups are supposed to do is they're supposed to come and talk to the person to see if this situation can be de-escalated first, rather than having weapons drawn and having them fired. And I think a lot of advocates, a lot of community members, and especially leaders are really pushing for more police jurisdictions to be able to rope in these grassroots organizations. Because I spoke to an advocate here, his name is Michael Redhead Champagne. He's connected to so many of these groups. And he's saying to me, in 80-90% of these cases, what somebody needs when they're holding a weapon is just to be humanized and to be listened to. Because when they call RCMP, they don't want anyone to shoot. They just want help. They're begging for mental health support and resources. So if we shoot first and ask questions later, that is a loss of a life. It's a loss of a community member and a relative. But if there is a way, 80-90% to be able to de-escalate that situation and have somebody get put through to resources that they need rather than hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, to me, it just seems like that's a better avenue whenever we're able to take it.
How formal are the relationships between these groups and either the police force or the RCMP? And, is it kind of spelled out in the terms of engagement that they need to be involved, or is it all just sort of done on an ad hoc basis?
I'm not sure, but for me, it seems like it's done on an ad hoc basis. We know that Indigiwatch wasn't there when Iggy was shot, and we're wondering why. And it really does vary from case to case. We don't really know what police or RCMP procedure is when they deem something too dangerous for somebody to come with and to try and de-escalate. So I think that that's another part of the problem, is that there isn't really a set procedure in terms of when these people are able to come with police and work with them, or when it's just too dangerous. And I hope that is one of the things that MPs have talked about.
I was going to ask, when you talk to leaders, or even just when you talk to people who work in these groups in the community, what do they actually think might make a difference beyond allowing these groups access? Like, it's been, 4 years plus since 2020, and I think since most, if not all of the country became aware of, marginalized people having worse outcomes with the police. And seems like a span of this many deaths in so short a time, there's not a lot left to say. Like, what does the community need to see in order to feel like some progress is being made here?
So not too long ago, I was actually speaking with the late Grand Chief Kathy Merrick. I was there when she passed away. And what really, really struck me was one of the last things she said was, these justice systems, these law enforcement procedures, they were not made with Indigenous people in mind. It's a whole other culture and spirituality that needs to be taken into account. So, for instance, when one group calls police or RCMP, perhaps they are looking for somebody to confront the person they're calling about. But when Indigenous people reach out, they're reaching out for help, mental health support, housing, food. So I think that, I don't know the answer, but it seems that a root cause is really just overhauling the system and rebuilding it in a way that really takes into account the different people, cultures, groups, organizations that that need their help.
Is there anywhere in this country that we can look to for an example on that? Like, I know that different First Nations have tried different things in this area to keep their own communities safe.
I don't want to tout Winnipeg too much, but I mean, it is the landscape that I know. I know that there are so many grassroots organizations that are coming up to, I don't want to say take the place of law enforcement, but they're looking to be the first people that Indigenous groups call so that, you know, people can be de-escalated before having to resort to call police or RCMP. I think we're doing some really, really great things in the city. I think that there are groups that are looking to partner with police and RCMP, but it is a really fragile time. And especially now with 6 people dead, I think that a lot of people are discouraged. But I know that there are so many groups and individuals here that, you know, are working hard despite the hardship and the trauma and the loss to really forge those relationships and to try and, you know, make tomorrow's call a better one.
The last thing I'll ask you, and I guess this is more asking for your opinion, but, you know, as you mentioned, you're fairly plugged into the community and you're present there. Is this maybe even beyond the community a wake-up call? I think a lot of people had thought that we'd gotten better at this, as I mentioned, and it's clear that we haven't. Do you see, obviously, these tragedies, just the timing of them, calling attention to anything? Is it getting picked up? Are you seeing traction from this?
Absolutely. I think now people are finally waking up. It's a hope that I have. But it's also really hard to say that because even before I started in news, just as I was filmmaking and speaking to people, these are long-standing calls. We're talking decades. So there's a pessimistic part of me that says what's going to be new this time, but there's also a hopeful part of me saying, you know, if MPs are having emergency meetings, if we're getting national attention to all of these deaths where, you know, 10 years ago might have not even been picked up by media, like it seems that a lot of times we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but I will take that as long as we're still moving forward. And, you know, I know that a lot of community members are hopeful. Not necessarily too optimistic, but I know that the hope and the resilience is always there. So, you know, perhaps in a naive way, I'm hoping that this is actually a turning point that we can look at and say, you know what, this is unfortunately what's been written in blood, but this is the moment where we finally enacted lasting change.
Joanne, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Joanna Roberts reporting for CityNews in Winnipeg. That was The Big Story. For more from us, you can head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can find all of our episodes there, and you can offer us feedback on this episode or any other by writing to hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or by calling us and leaving a voicemail. 416-935-5935 is the number. The Big Story is available in every podcast player, including Seeker, and on your smart speaker if you ask it to play The Big Story podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. We'll talk tomorrow.